Okay, so our speaker this morning is Professor Torin Alter from the University of Alabama. Professor Alter works mainly in the philosophy of mind and philosophy of language, with a focus on consciousness and the mind-body problem. He's published in a wide range of journals, including Nous, Mind, Phil Studies, the Australasian Journal, PPR, and elsewhere. That's quite a list. His most recent book is The Matter of Consciousness, From the Knowledge Argument to Russellian Monism. I looked around a little bit on the web, and I found an interview, a very brief interview, on the web page of his PhD alma mater, UCLA. And in that interview, he was asked what about UCLA's approach to philosophy has influenced him most intellectually. And he replied, the emphasis on depth and precision, the application of formal logic to all philosophical issues. So today he will be speaking on physicalism and fundamental mentality. So please welcome Professor Alter.
Well,
I should say, as usual, we'll have the talk, a brief break, and then a question and answer for roughly an hour.
Great, perfect. Thank you very much. A lovely introduction, and thank you all so much for having me here. I'm very excited to be here, and looking forward to talking to you about this little paper and just in general. I've been so far enjoying my day here immensely. All right. So according to Jessica Wilson, physicalism is incompatible with the existence of fundamental mentality. This is known as the NFM constraint on physicalism, NFM for no fundamental mentality. I kind of hate using acronyms, so it makes me feel like I'm in the military or something, but people just do in this topic, so, I don't want to bust the trend. Wilson is far from alone in endorsing the NFM constraint, and I count myself among its proponents, but it has been challenged. Some has devised counterexamples, coherent scenarios in which fundamental mentality exists and physicalism might be true all the same. I think this dispute derives largely from the fact that the content of the NFM constraint is unclear. In this talk, I'll clarify the constraint, defend it against objections, and explain its basis. I'll start with some background, then I'll describe the counterexamples. After that, I'll distinguish two ways the constraint could be understood. On one interpretation, it concerns mentality existing at the most fundamental level of nature. On another interpretation, it concerns mentality that's either primitively mental or fundamentally mentally constituted. After explaining that distinction, I'll make a case for adopting that second interpretation, which I'll argue the counterexamples don't threaten. Some of this talk will be a bit in the weeds, as they say, but the take-home message is actually pretty simple. It's that, contrary to what NFM critics often assume, the reason physicalists can't abide fundamental mentality has nothing to do with where or at what level mentality may reside. Instead, the reason concerns the nature of fundamental mentality, the type of thing it would be. Its nature wouldn't be wholly physical. That's why physicalists must deny it exists, not because of anything to do with levels of nature. All right, first, some background. Should I wait or? Okay. Okay. Let's right between the intro and the background. I wonder if I could have theme music between each section. Okay, first some background. The main thesis of physicalism can be stated in 3 words. Everything is physical. But all 3 of those words raise questions. Take everything. What's in the scope of that universal quantifier? For example, should physicalism concern abstract phenomena, such as numbers and photology, or just concrete phenomena, such as rocks and mental states? What is that distinction anyway? Robert Howell calls that the domain problem. Let's move on to word number 2, is. It's common to reserve the term physical for phenomena posited by physics, such as electrons and quarks and mass and so forth. But what about other phenomena that physicalists countenance, or can countenance? What relation do rocks and mental states bear to electrons and quarks, if physicalism is true? Identity, constitution, at least supervenience, right? Actually, even that's controversial. Howell calls that the relation problem. But I mentioned the domain problem and the relation problem only to set them aside. Today, my concern is with part of what Howell calls the base problem, the problem of what counts as physical for the purposes of physicalism. The NFM constraint is usually discussed in connection to an aspect of the base problem known as Hempel's dilemma. It goes like this. Suppose we characterize the physical in relation to the posits of physical theory. Again, this is often done. Well, which physical theory? Current physical theory? Presumably not. For one thing, current physical theory is probably not fully accurate. Moreover, it's incomplete. We shouldn't conclude that something isn't physical just because current physics has yet to posit it. How about completed or ideal physical theory? Well, this too seems problematic. We don't yet know the content of completed physics. In particular, we can't rule out the possibility that physicalists will one day come to posit something mental. For example, imagine they posit consciousness to collapse the wave function. But if the class of basic physical phenomena includes anything mental, then it's hard to see how physicalism could be true. It's not physicalists, but rather dualists and idealists who include mental phenomena among the world's basic ingredients. The NFM constraint is often invoked in response to that second horn of Hempel's dilemma, on which physical phenomena are those posited by completed physical theory. The idea is this. What counts as physical should not be determined solely by physical theory. Physical theory might well play a central role, but we can and should add a further stipulation, an a priori restriction. We should stipulate that the physical does not include fundamental mentality. That move would enable us to circumvent the problem that completed physics might posit mental things. Maybe physics will do that, but if so, those posits won't qualify as physical because of the a priori restriction. And if fundamental mentality is thus excluded from the class of physical phenomena, then the NFM constraint on physicalism is justified. But what justifies excluding fundamental mentality from the class of physical phenomena? Why isn't doing so ad hoc? Wilson provides a plausible answer. She writes, I quote, reflecting the historical roots of physicalism in materialism as foundationally committed to understanding mentality as nothing over and above complex material goings-on, one feature has remained definitive of the term physical, namely that the compositionally basic physical entities and features are not fundamentally mental, that is, do not individually either possess or bestow mentality. End quote. In other words, physicalists reject fundamental mentality because its existence would threaten their foundational commitment to the doctrine that there's nothing over and above the physical. At least that's how I read Wilson, and anyway, I think the point is quite plausible. One final preliminary. Even if physicalists must reject foundational mentality, even if physicalists must reject fundamental mentality, they can't accept the existence of non-fundamental mentality. Physicalists need not be limitativists. It's just that the mentality they countenance can't be over and above the physical. Arguably, certain sorts of mental things satisfy that condition. Well, what sorts of mental? A clear example would be the sort recognized by physicalists who are realizer functionalists, such as David Lewis. Those philosophers identify mental properties with lower order properties that satisfy certain higher order functional descriptions relative to a certain population. On Lewis's physicalist version of that theory, mental properties in humans are identified with certain neural properties. For example, in humans, pain might be identified with neural property N on the grounds that N satisfies a functional description, such as the state that's typically caused by damage to the body that typically causes one to grimace, and so on and so forth. NFM critic Christopher Brown provides a more general description of the sort of mentality that's compatible with physicalism. It is, he writes, and I quote, mentality for which relational properties of the system, the parts of the system necessitate mental properties for that system. Here the term relational properties has wide scope and is intended to cover both stereotypically relational properties like spatiotemporal and structural properties, as well as causal and dispositional properties, which are properties that govern the behavior of and interactions between things. Mentality satisfying Brown's description might be considered physical, or at least not over and above the physical. In his terminology, which I'll borrow, such mentality is physicalism friendly. Okay, that's it for background. Let's turn to the counterexamples. Again, these are supposed to be conceivable scenarios in which physicalism is true despite the presence of fundamental mentality. I'll begin with one, there are 6 of these in total, so bear with me. I'll begin with one devised by Jonathan Dorsey. He writes, suppose you are operating an atom smasher and you think you have discovered a physical simple, i.e. a physical entity with no proper parts. You discover it has certain properties like, say, spin, mass, certain effects on quarks, a definite spatial location when measured, and so forth. But now, imagine God pays you a visit, assuring you that this thing is indeed a simple, but also that it has a mental property. How should we describe the simple entity you've discovered? Dorsey suggests that it's both physical and fundamentally mental, which sounds like exactly what the NFM constraint rules out. So that's one counterexample. Zhong describes 2 more. One involves a hypothetical phenomenon he calls S-neutrino fluctuation. This is supposed to be a fundamental microphysical phenomenon that, as he puts it, has a non-mental mode of presentation in ideal physics. He imagines that S-neutrino fluctuation turns out to be identical with consciousness. And he suggests that in that scenario, S-neutrino fluctuation is both physical and fundamentally mental. The other counterexample involves C-fiber stimulation. He writes, suppose that ideal physics tells us that C-fibers are fundamental, irreducible entities, and suppose further that pain is identical with C-fiber firing. Here again, he suggests we have something that's both physical and fundamentally mental. Chris Brown describes 3 further complications. These are kind of complicated. One of them concerns priority monism, the holist view that the world has parts, but the parts are dependent fragments of an integrated whole. Brown imagined priority monist worlds in which the whole of nature is a mental system which possesses functionally characterizable mentality. He describes one such world as follows. Quote, imagine a world containing only a single functioning brain. All non-brain entities in this world are parts of the brain. Nothing is left floating free in the cosmic void. This brain realizes mental properties, and those mental properties are necessitated by the instantiation of appropriate relational properties of the parts of the brain. Add the detail that priority monism is true in this world, and we get the result that some properties of the cosmos-encompassing brain are fundamental. Since the brain has mental properties, some mental properties may be fundamental in this world. And yet, since its sole inhabitant is just a physical brain, physicalism, he thinks, might be true of that world. Brown's second counterexample involves an infinitely decomposable world. This is kind of a fun one. A world without a fundamental level which decomposes into an infinite regress of functionally characterizable mental properties. He calls this world MPW, so another acronym, I'm afraid, for all mental and all physical world. MPW contains only a single highest level system, a brain he calls Alex. I think all the brains are sort of, all the names used are kind of gender neutral, which I kind of like. Like the brain in the previous example, Alex has parts that are dynamically arranged in such a way that they produce mentality for the thing they compose. For example, Alex might have neural properties that, according to realizer functionalism, count as mental. The same is true of Alex's parts. Brown writes, Alex is made of many interacting components, call them breadths. Collectively, all the breadths, through their interactions, generate Alex's mentality. But also, each breadth is mental for the same reason Alex is. Every breadth has many parts, call them Charlies, which cause the breadths to be mental in virtue of the Charlies' interactions. And the same story goes for each Charlie, which is composed of little Devins, and so on, infinitely. In MPW, mentality appears at every level of reality, but all of that mentality is physicalism friendly. So physicalism could be true of MPW. Now, actually, I don't know why Brown thinks MPW threatens the NFM constraint. The other counterexamples we've discussed so far, and the ones I will discuss, they're scenarios in which physicalism might be true despite the presence of fundamental mentality. But at MPW, there is no fundamental level, so why think there's any fundamental mentality? And if there isn't any, then the constraint isn't threatened. However, an indirect threat does loom. Physicalism could be true of certain infinitely decomposable worlds. Indeed, according to Jonathan Schaffer, the actual world might turn out to be one. There should be a way to extend the NFM constraint to account for this possibility. Barbara Gale Montero has made an influential proposal on this score, which I call the no low-level mentality constraint. I won't use an acronym, I'll spell it out. It says that physicalism is incompatible with the existence of both fundamental mentality and an infinite descent of mentality, a chain of decomposition in which mentality appears not just at some relatively high levels, but at lower levels, yet lower levels and so on ad infinitum. So it kind of looks like this, where you have, what you can have, according to Montero, is you can have maybe physical things that are composed of mental things that are composed of physical things, but you can't just have M's and so on infinitely. And now we're in business. In MPW, there is an infinite descent of mentality like that, but physicalism could still be true. Remember, MPW contains only brains. As Dr. Seuss might say, it's brains all the way down. So even if MPW doesn't threaten the NFM constraint per se, it threatens a natural extension of it. Okay, one last counterexample. According to Brown, this one is even more troubling for NFM constraint proponents. He imagines an artificially intelligent quantum computer which employs quantum properties as part of its cognitive operations. By realizer functionalism, one of those quantum properties might qualify as a physicalism friendly mental property. Nevertheless, the same quantum property might be fundamental. Okay, how would such a quantum computer work, and why think it would have properties that are once mental, physicalism friendly, and fundamental? Well, Brown provides detailed explanations. Regarding how such a computer would work, he extrapolates from current research on quantum computing. He writes, at present, quantum computers operate by employing quantum circuits which execute functions by manipulating basic units of quantum information, called qubits, by a basic logical transformation called quantum gates. The main thing that distinguishes qubits from bits of classical computers, the main thing that distinguishes qubits from the bits of classical computers is that the bits can exist in only one of two states, 0 and 1, whereas qubits exist in superposition with 1 and 0 as only two possible states in a two-dimensional Hilbert space. Though 0 and 1 are the only possible measurable states of a qubit due to collapse from a superposition upon measurement, it can store hidden information which is manipulable through quantum gates. So, by using quantum gates to manipulate qubits, an artificially intelligent quantum computer could have a physicalism-friendly property that plays a mentally relevant functional role, a property that, by realizer functionalism, qualifies as mental. If that property is fundamental, then, according to Brown, there would be precisely the sort of fundamental mentality that the NFM constraint deems incompatible with physicalism. Yet nothing in his description of the quantum computer seems in tension with physicalism. So that's another counterexample. Brown claims that his quantum AI counterexample doesn't rely on contentious metaphysical assumptions. That's why he thinks it's especially troubling. In particular, he claims it's nomologically possible. Indeed, he thinks it may become actual at some time in the foreseeable future. And that's not true of MPW or the priority monist world he describes. But what about the assumption that some quantum properties are fundamental? That kind of sounds like a contentious metaphysical assumption to me, but Brown recognizes this concern, and he argues that the assumption isn't actually essential to his argument. And he writes this, however deep the fundamental level lies, it seems a plausible supposition that we might, in principle anyway, exploit the properties of that level to perform computations. And this is all my argument requires. Maybe so. Anyway, I'm happy to grant him that for the sake of argument. Okay. I don't know if there's more music to cue the next section. Let me move on. So there you go, 6 alleged counterexamples to the NFM constraint. But on reflection, I think all 6 fail. Moreover, they fail for the same reason. A misunderstanding of the type of fundamentality the NFM constraint is meant to exclude. So anyway, I'll now argue. I'll begin with a simple question. What is fundamental mentality? I suppose the general idea is clear enough. As Brown writes, fundamental mentality is mentality which metaphysically depends on nothing else. It is mentality that at the bottom of nature. That description is all well and good, but it could mean at least two different things. On the one hand, something might count as fundamentally mental when it meets two conditions. It's mental, and it exists at the most fundamental level of nature. Call that levels-based fundamental mentality. On the other hand, something might count as fundamentally mental when it's either primitively mental or fundamentally mentally constituted. Call that constitutionally fundamental mentality. Levels-based fundamental mentality and constitutionally fundamental mentality are not equivalent. In levels-based fundamental mentality, the term fundamental applies to a level of nature. Here it's assumed that nature is stratified into a hierarchy of levels, where the most fundamental level is that on which all other levels metaphysically depend. For example, the most fundamental level might be the microphysical level, while the chemical level is higher and the biological level is higher still. On the levels-based approach, fundamental mentality is mentality that exists at the most fundamental level. By contrast, constitutionally fundamental mentality doesn't imply anything about levels of nature. It doesn't even imply that nature is stratified into levels at all. Here the term fundamental applies to a type of mentality. That type is either primitive mentality or mentality that's fundamentally mentally constituted. Let me explain. I'll start with constitution. I'll explain that last bit, fundamentally mentally constituted. I'll start with constitution. This is a familiar notion of ontological dependence, also known as metaphysical grounding, and sometimes as existing in virtue of. For example, a diamond exists in virtue of, or is constituted by, or grounded in, a lattice of carbon atoms. There's a large literature on this notion, but the central idea is, I hope, clear enough for present purposes. Let me now turn to fundamental constitution. If X is fundamentally constituted by Y, then Y has no further underlying constitution. So, although a diamond is constituted by carbon atoms, it's not fundamentally so constituted. That's because carbon atoms are themselves constituted by more basic entities. So, for something to be fundamentally mentally constituted is for its fundamental constitution to include mentality. And for something to be primitively mental is for it to be mental but not constituted by anything. Before going any further, I should mention that introducing constitutionally fundamental mentality might be overkill. I define that notion disjunctively. Such mentality is either primitively mental or fundamentally mentally constituted. But the existence of anything that's fundamentally mentally constituted might actually entail the existence of primitive mentality. If there is such an entailment, then the contrast between levels-based fundamental mentality and primitive mentality is really all I need. But in fact, I'm not so sure the entailment holds, so out of an abundance of caution, that's the phrase I hear in Alabama when they cancel classes because of a 25% chance of snow flurries. Out of an abundance of caution, I'll stick with the more cumbersome disjunctive notion. The distinction I've drawn between levels-based fundamental mentality and constitutionally fundamental mentality yields two different versions of the NFM constraint. There's the levels-based NFM constraint, which says that physicalism is incompatible with mentality existing at the most fundamental level of nature. Then there's the constitutional NFM. It says that physicalism is incompatible with the existence of mentality that's either primitively mental or fundamentally mentally constituted. How should the NFM constraint be understood? As the levels-based version or as the constitutional version? Dorsey, Zhong, and Brown seem to understand the NFM constraint as the levels-based version. This is suggested by various remarks they make. For example, Zhong seems to equate fundamental mentality with, in his words, mentality that exists at the fundamental metaphysical level. Moreover, and the others make similar remarks. Moreover, all but one of their counterexamples seem to depend on the levels-based interpretation. These counterexamples involve physicalism-friendly mentality existing at the most fundamental level of nature. The one exception is Brown's MPW, which has no fundamental level, but even there, the counterexample seems to depend on a levels-based conception of fundamentality, where for X to be more fundamental than Y is for X to exist at a lower level than Y in a hierarchy of levels. But I think the NFM constraint should be understood as the constitutional version, not the levels-based version. For one thing, historically at least, physicalism's two main competitors are dualism and idealism. And constitutional fundamental mentality better comports with how dualists and idealists conceive of mentality. On those views, mentality doesn't consist in non-mentality of any kind, be it physical or something else. All mentality is either primitive or at least fundamentally mentally constituted, and levels need not enter into the picture. Moreover, recall why physicalists regard fundamental mentality as anathema. As Wilson explains in the passage I quoted earlier, the physicalists' worry about fundamental mentality is that it would be over and above the physical. In other words, if there were fundamental mentality, then mental phenomena would not consist wholly in physical phenomena. That worry is not about where or at what level mentality exists. Instead, the worry concerns the fundamental nature of mentality. This suggests the constitutional interpretation. Think of it this way. The world contains various and sundry phenomena. There are chemical phenomena, biological phenomena, botanical phenomena, psychological phenomena, and many, many other types too. But if physicalism is true, then fundamentally, all of them are of a single unified type, namely physical. That is, if physicalism is true, then everything is either itself a physical phenomenon or fundamentally physically constituted. On this view, although many things are chemically constituted, none is fundamentally chemically constituted, nor is anything fundamentally biologically constituted or fundamentally botanically constituted, and in particular, nothing is fundamentally mentally constituted if physicalism is true. Now, chemical phenomena might be necessarily chemical, biological phenomena might be necessarily biological, and so on. For example, water is necessarily H2O, according to Kripke at least. Even so, if we ask what water is in the most fundamental sense, what water ultimately consists in, then the physicalist answer is clear. Water ultimately consists in physical phenomena. And the class of basic physical phenomena might not include chemical compounds. Likewise for all other phenomena, including in particular mental phenomena. If physicalism is true, then in the most fundamental sense, mental phenomena consist entirely in physical phenomena. Entirely and only. Such reasoning suggests that physicalists should endorse the constitutional NFM constraint, not the level-based one. That conclusion can be further supported by considering an exchange between Wilson and Daniel Stoljar over whether physicalism is compatible with panpsychism. Panpsychism is viewed that, as Montero puts it, mental properties pervade all aspects of the world. Stoljar writes, panpsychism per se is not inconsistent with physicalism. After all, the fact that there are some conscious beings is not contrary to physicalism. Why then should the possibility that everything is a conscious being be contrary to physicalism? Wilson seems to take the opposite position. According to her, the possibility that everything is a conscious being is contrary to physicalism. The reason she suggests is that if everything is a conscious being, then some fundamental beings would be conscious. And physicalism can't accommodate conscious fundamental beings. Now that dispute might seem hard to resolve. On the one hand, Wilson's response to Stoljar's argument is dialectically suspicious, declaring that, according to physicalism, fundamental beings can't be conscious comes perilously close to assuming her conclusion that panpsychism and physicalism conflict. On the other hand, there's at least a prima facie tension between physicalism and panpsychism, and it's plausible that this tension derives from the specter of fundamental mentality. So, difficult to resolve, but I think this difficulty can be traced to the ambiguity I've been droning on about. If we understand the term fundamental mentality in the levels-based sense, then Stoljar's position seems the more reasonable one. As he suggests, the ubiquity of mentality does not seem inconsistent with physicalism. That's because all such mentality might be physicalism-friendly, regardless of where it resides. But suppose we understand fundamental mentality, the term, in the constitutional sense. In that case, Wilson's position seems the more reasonable one. Neither primitive nor fundamentally constituted mentality is physicalism-friendly. If panpsychism entails that either exist, then Wilson is right. Panpsychism is inconsistent with physicalism. So the distinction between levels-based and constitutionally fundamental mentality provides a way to resolve the Stoljar-Wilson dispute, but that's not my main reason for mentioning it. My main reason is that the dispute nicely illustrates the fact that the constitutional NFM constraint is plausible, and the levels-based version is not. And that's a strong reason to interpret the constraint as the constitutional version. Okay. With that in mind, finally, let's revisit the counterexamples. I'll now argue that while they might refute the levels-based NFM constraint, they leave the constitutional version unscathed. Let's start with Dorsey's counterexample, in which God assures you that a physical simple has a mental property. To refute the constitutional NFM constraint, that mental property would have to be primitively mental or fundamentally mentally constituted. But Dorsey provides no reason to think it is either. Maybe it has a mental property for some other reason. For example, perhaps that a property, a physical simple, plays a mentally relevant functional role in a physically realized cognitive system. Something physicalism friendly. If the scenario involves nothing that's primitively mental or fundamentally mentally constituted, then the constitutional NFM constraint isn't threatened. But Dorsey might respond by adding a further stipulation. God tells you that the physical simple has a property that's not only mental, but primitively mental or fundamentally mentally constituted. But that wouldn't help Dorsey's argument. Assuming what God tells you is true, that further stipulation would entail that your physical simple's mental property isn't physicalism friendly. In other words, the further stipulation would undermine Dorsey's premise that physicalism might be true in the scenario he imagines. Let's turn to Zhong's counterexamples. In both, a fundamental physical phenomenon turns out to be identical to a mental phenomenon. In one case, S-neutrino fluctuation is both fundamental and identical to consciousness. In his other case, C-fiber firing turns out to be fundamental and identical to pain. These cases do seem to threaten the levels-based constraint, but is the constitutional version threatened? Here the key issue is whether his cases involve physicalism-friendly phenomena that are primitively mental or fundamentally mentally constituted. Do they? Well, take S-neutrino fluctuation. In virtue of what is this phenomenon mental? Perhaps it's mental in virtue of being identical to consciousness. Well, that's the end of the story. That this case would seem to involve primitive mentality. But then the S-neutrino fluctuation phenomenon would be over and above the physical. And so physicalism wouldn't be true in the scenario he imagined. Zhong might deny that S-neutrino fluctuation is mental in virtue of being identical to consciousness, but then in virtue of what is it mental? Perhaps it's mental in virtue of realizing some physicalism-friendly functional feature. If so, physicalism might well be true of the scenario, but then there's no reason to think that the scenario involves anything that's either primitively mental or fundamentally mentally constituted. So again, the constitutional NFM isn't threatened. Let's turn to Brown's counterexample, starting with the most troubling one, according to him, the quantum computer case. Recall that in this case, there's an artificially intelligent quantum computer that employs quantum properties as part of its cognitive operations. In Brown's view, one such quantum property might be fundamental, mental, and physicalism friendly. Fundamental, because it's a quantum property that exists at the most fundamental level of nature. Mental, because it plays an appropriate functional role in the system's mental life. And physicalism friendly, because it consists in the obtaining of relations between physical or physicalism friendly phenomena. Okay, suppose Brown is right on all three counts. It does not follow that the case refutes the NFM constraint on physicalism, or rather, that does not follow unless we assume that the fundamental mentality that the NFM constraint concerns is the levels-based variety. If instead the constraint concerns constitutionally fundamental mentality, then the threat disappears. If the relevant quantum property of the AI is mental, then it's mental in virtue of playing a certain functional role. Its mentality isn't primitive, nor is its mentality constituted, at least not fundamentally. Nor is it mentally constituted, at least not fundamentally. Rather, its mentality is constituted by the obtaining of relations among physicalism or physicalism-friendly phenomena. Okay, Brown might object, and by the way, Zhong could make the same case, but I'll just talk about Brown. Brown might object as follows. Let M be the relevant mental property of the quantum computer, and let R be the quantum property in virtue of which M is mental. By realizer functionalism, R and M are identical. And since M is mental, it follows by Leibniz's law that R is mental too. Thus, R is mentally constituted after all. And since R is fundamental, R is fundamentally mentally constituted. But that reasoning is fallacious. That X constitutes Y does not entail that every feature of X figures into its constituting Y. Imagine a drawing of little circular dots arranged in a big circle. There's one in the handout, and I put one up there. The big figure's circularity is constituted by the arrangement of the dots, or the little circles in that drawing. The fact that the dots are themselves circular, though, is irrelevant to their doing that constituting work. They could just as easily have been little squares. Likewise, if M is mental, then it is so in virtue of its relational features, that is, in virtue of its playing an appropriate functional role in the quantum computer's cognitive system. That the role player happens to be mental is incidental to its constituting M's mentality. Something non-mental could as easily have played the same functional role. Brown's other two counterexamples have the same problem as his quantum computer counterexample. Recall that in the priority monist world he described, there's only a single brain whose properties are properties of the whole of nature. To refute the constitutional NFM constraint, he would have to show that the brain he imagines has a physicalism-friendly property that's primitively mental or fundamentally mentally constituted, and not merely a physicalism-friendly mental property that exists at the most fundamental level. And he doesn't do that, and I don't see how he can. Likewise for MPW, the infinitely decomposable all-mental, all-physical world. Once again, the key is to recognize that the NFM constraint concerns constitutionally fundamental mentality, not levels-based fundamental mentality. So understood, the constraint applies to infinitely decomposable worlds no less than worlds that are not infinitely decomposable. So Montero's extension of the constraint, the no low-level mentality version, isn't actually needed. Even if MPW contains an infinite descent of mentality, there's no reason to think any of it need be primitively mental or fundamentally mentally constituted. Once again, the constitutional NFM constraint is not correct. Okay, time to wrap up. It's common to understand the NFM constraint as concerning mentality that exists at the most fundamental level of nature. And I've argued that this is a mistake. The levels-based interpretation leaves the constraint vulnerable to counterexamples of the sort Dorsey, Zhong, and Brown described, scenarios in which physicalism could be true despite the existence of mentality at the most fundamental level. But in none of those scenarios is there mentality that's either primitively mental or fundamentally mentally constituted. If there were, then those scenarios would be incompatible with physicalism. Thus, the constitutional NFM remains unrefuted. I'll end with a question and a speculative answer. Question: why do so many assume that the NFM constraint concerns levels-based fundamentality? That actually includes some of its proponents as well as its opponents. Well, I think this tendency derives largely from the failure to appreciate the implications of physicalism as being a form of type monism. Type monism says that there's exactly one unified substantive fundamental nature that everything shares, one highest type in Jonathan Schaffer's terminology. Physicalism starts there and adds that the unified nature that everything shares is physical as opposed to mental or neutral, say. I think that that's what ultimately explains why physicalists can't tolerate fundamental mentality. Such mentality would not have the unified physical fundamental mentality, would not have the unified physical nature that, according to physicalism, everything shares. Or rather, that would be true of mentality that's primitive or fundamentally mentally constituted, but not necessarily of mentality existing at the most fundamental level of nature. In any event, if my main argument is sound, then the NFM constraint should be interpreted as the constitutional version, and the constitutional version is not refuted by the counterexamples Dorsey, Zhong, and Brown devise. In that sense, Wilson's view is vindicated. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll take our usual break. Oh, got a bit of time. Why don't we take a 5-minute break, and then we'll reconvene for question and answer.
And please, there's coffee and breakfast treats, so please help yourself.
Or Zoom.
Yes.
Hey, how's it going?
Doing all right, how are you? Somebody will keep track.
There's the second one, it's the same.
Did I go too quickly?
Like, where's the caffeine?
That's good.
Good.
I've been moving towards shorter talks too. Fresh,
Yeah.
get things out, it allows people to
Here.
pick up on what they want. This has been a shift in the last 2 years. I've been
No
moving
problem.
towards shorter.
Yeah.
I think it works.
You sure you're not just putting in less effort?
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw this kind of thing, was at the,
My office, I was listening to talk. I was
visited, I was a participant.
as long as I saw it, this is the first
I'd try myself. And one day, I Chomsky said, we're going to speak philosophy. No presentation was one
Well, I have no idea.
I spent a lot of time thinking about philosophy or issues, in terms of getting organizing, getting a nice structured conversation. Because it's, people, it's just random, and then often have people go back 5 questions later, because that's where they showed up in the queue.
Well, the
Kind of chaotic.
thinking often addresses that.
So most people I talk to say, no, that's terrible, you can't just be most people think there's no better way to do it. But
Well, the hidden fingers are one of
I'm in a better organizing. Yes.
It at least addresses that aspect. Of course, finger abuse is right.
Please.
Oh.
Right, yeah, finger abuse.
Yeah, I hope that wasn't captured on the Zoom thing.
Yeah, we can get in trouble. We can definitely get in trouble in LA.
I know, yeah, oh, yeah.
That's what yeah, it's a shame. Kind of karmic system where you use the finger explicitly. That would be good. That would really help.
Actual physical damage to your finger, like
yeah, it gets
it's pretty brain or something. It's like Pinocchio.
yeah, everyone knows. Oh, you're that one. Okay.
No.
Sometimes it's also fun because I guess the finger is supposed to follow, so it's got to have some connection to it. That's true also true of a huge new compound. I think it's got to be both directly connected and a minor. The major biology, then
I don't think they managed to respond successfully. That's basically
yes.
I'm sorry, that wasn't a focus.
Oh, but I've seen that. That's interesting. You got a lot more than one finger. That's like a hand. So hold off on that. But yeah, it makes it better to have people release themselves. Maybe we need a third finger. I don't know.
Right, because it has some realistic aspects.
We start with the fingers.
It's like transferring realism plus like a sense of mind. Realism
Note is not placed to be seen by anyone.
It fell down.
Oh, I see.
So it's like halfway.
Who are the most of those?
It's advertising.
Yes.
And that's my
Communicate.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's time for us to get started. So please, if you have a question, raise your hand. I will put people's names in a queue. And Joshua, is there anybody on?
No.
No? Okay.
I'll watch the chat in case I check this.
Okay. Kirk, why don't you get us started on people's names now?
Yeah. So I was convinced that all of these guys just missed the boat on what the idea was about no fundamental mentality. But I was thinking about another kind of move. I wonder what you might think about it, and that's Davidson's anomalous monism. And the general idea is that there's a, I love the description of objects in the world involving the mental vocabulary, and it supervenes on a complete description of the world in physical terms, but nonetheless it's not reducible. So if the supervenience, we get those two ideas together, and of course every mental event is identical to some physical event. So we got supervenience, but we also get non-reduction. It's not a functionalist story, it's not an identity story, so it looks like maybe the mental there is fundamental, but physicalism is vindicated. So the question is, could that be a kind of counterexample to no fundamental mentality?
Great question, but I was with you until that kind of mentality is fundamental. I mean, it might be fundamental in the sense that it's not a priori implied by, say, the complete physical description in terms of the terminology of microphysics. You may get, no a priori implication there, so it might be in some epistemic or linguistic sense, there might be fundamentality, but it's not. I was assuming here that the only candidates on the table for fundamental mentality are metaphysically fundamental. This is sort of within that branch. There might be fundamental mentality that's compatible with physicalism in an epistemic or in linguistic sense. And it sounds like, your description of the Davidson view suggested something like that. Am I wrong to that?
Well, maybe Davidson might have said purely linguistic, but I think it's sort of no conceptual reduction.
Yeah, no conceptual reduction. Yeah. So I think that's a common move to say that, and it's not entirely distinctive of anomalous monism. Davidson's view that there's a kind of conceptual dualism that's compatible with physicalism, which is a monist view. So in the thing I write mostly about, in the knowledge argument and the dialectic about that, a very common move is to say, well, it's our concepts of consciousness in particular that are irreducible to any physical concepts or any other concepts at all, but metaphysically, physicalism is true nonetheless. This would be another case where you have, in a sense, mentality is, in a sense, fundamental, but that sense is not metaphysical. So, this particular literature comes from, again, Jessica Wilson, who introduced this as a actually her constraint is not on physicalism, but it's on the concept of the physical. But in any case, it's squarely, what she's clearly talking about is a metaphysical fundamentality. Conception. There's no claim. And I should say, in background of this, so I guess it sort of gets started in 1983 with David Lewis on New York for a Theory of Universals, where he asked, what is the minimum physicalist thesis? And he suggests there a supervenience thesis of a certain kind. But the answer that has come in the literature sort of following that has been, well, it's some kind of metaphysical thesis, and then there's a lot of options for how to flesh out that metaphysical thesis, and also how it connects to epistemic theses. So in terms of linguistic fundamentality, that's okay. So I don't think physicalism is, it wouldn't be, I don't think there's any incompatibility between physicalism and linguistically fundamental mentality. Metaphysically fundamental mentality is the issue.
Yeah. Well, I hear this adverb metaphysically, and I'm just trying to look through it to see what it really comes to. And so let me rephrase the Davidson story in a way that maybe you wouldn't have been happy with, but because it's just not talking about properties. But so you have various propositional attitudes, and what they are within certain transformations, the different interpretation schemes are fixed by physical facts.
Yeah.
Okay. But these are real properties of you.
Mm-hmm.
They're real states of you. There are properties in the world that supervene on the physical, but those properties are distinct from the physical properties. So what does metaphysical add to the fact that you have mental properties that are distinct from any physical properties or anything you can construct logically out of physical properties?
Yeah, there's two responses to that question. One, that again, I'm talking about what I think Jonathan Dorsey called it minimal physicalism. What's the minimal physicalist thesis to which any physicalist should be committed? And certainly, physicalism isn't committed to an identity thesis. There are physicalist views which reject any attempt to identify those mental properties with any physical properties. So at least, whether that's actually an internally consistent view is debatable, but it certainly is, in terms of a show of hands. I mean, there are physicalists who would say, yeah, mental properties are numerically distinct, both type and token. Right. So in terms of the identity claim, that's not a commitment of physicalism. But you have what is metaphysically? I tend to think of this as a basic notion, but it's mostly negative. By metaphysical, I mean mostly not epistemic, something about the world, not our perspective on it, something like that. I just need a placeholder for something like that. I guess I'll defer to authority. What people interpret crypty as meaning something like that, too core, not relative to anything, and also not, in particular, not relative to our perspective, linguistic or epistemic. So,
yeah. Well, so I was thinking that this view, I mean, I'm not sure it's coherent, supervenience, but no reduction in how you tell that story. Yeah. It's really mysterious, but I mean, it's a position that if you can make it out of logical space might. And so your response is to say, well, that's merely linguistic or conceptual epistemic. But I was thinking, this falls under a certain concept of being rectangular. So it has a property being rectangular. That's a property in the world. It's independent of my mind and so on. Now, of course, mental property is not independent of every mind because there has to be a mind for that. But, my opinion of the property you doesn't mean that it's dependent on my perspective on you. I can get it right or wrong. And so I was thinking that's the way it looks from Davidson's perspective.
Well, sorry, a two-part answer. One was the point that you correctly counted that the emphasis here is on metaphysics as opposed to epistemology and linguistics. But the other is that there's no claim here in the NFM constraint that an identity is required. So, and that is, I think, a metaphysical claim. Like the claim about the square or the rectangular shape and mental properties. Claim that mental properties are distinct, numerically distinct from.
I take the point, and functionalist is an example. But of course, Davidson's also not a functionalist.
Yeah.
So there's supposed to be some other position there where it's not a functionalist view, it's not an identity view. It endorses supervenience, but it says there's no way to sort of no entailment. It is sort of.
I think that there's going to be no a priori entailment, but again, that's about about knowledge or implication or something like that. But there had better be a metaphysical entailment, necessitation. It better be that there's no possible world in which the physical facts are the same, and adding a couple of other stipulations, and the mental facts vary. And if that isn't true, well, again, that has been disputed, but I've defended that independently. I think that there is a coherent position there, but if it's a physicalist position, it's got to minimally be committed to both a metaphysical supervenience claim, not an epistemic supervenience claim, and I defended the idea Wilson's idea that there's got to be no fundamental mentality in the sense of that. So I don't think that that's a counterexample because I think that there isn't a clear case where we have one without the other. Richard.
Yeah, thanks so much for the talk. So I guess I was just kind of hoping to get some clarity about how to understand the constitutional NFM if we're looking at a particular case. So I guess I was wondering about a world that's composed of mental gunk. And for every level in this world of mentality, there's going to be mentality that's explained by the mentality at the next level down. So here it looks like we don't have fundamentally mentally constituted mentality. There's no fundamental level in the mental gunk world. But it's also not clear if there's a primitive mentality going on in this world. So I guess I was just wondering if you could kind of clarify the constitutional and constraint in such a way that kind of avoids these sorts of counterexamples.
Actually, that exact case is why I alluded to the fact that I'm not convinced. I'm worried that we need this notion of constitutionally. Fundamentally mentally constituted mentality, exactly because of this case. Because the simplest way to do it would be to say, well, the kind of thing that the NFM constraint is saying is incompatible with physicalism is primitive mentality. But I don't know if that counts as primitive mentality in that case, and that's what gets. I was thinking though that would be fundamentally mentally constituted. The notion of fundamental of constitution doesn't, at least in terms of the term, it doesn't require a bottom that there to be any, that there could be an infinite chain of, infinite descent of constitution. That sounds like that case to me. So I would put it in terms of, but it seems partly terminological, something in that vicinity. That is a hard case though.
Okay, so the idea then is that, well, there's no fundamental level, but because there's an infinite chain of mentality, it's going to count as fundamental mental constitution.
Yeah, that's the idea, because it seems like the relationship between the lower level gunk and the higher level gunk is just like the lattice of carbon atoms in the diamond. It's just that when you go down one further level, there's still another one, and it seems like the same relation to me. And you could say it's primitive, but I think the Constitution seems a more natural way to describe that. That's why I like that.
Thanks.
David?
Yeah, thank you. Sort of a ground floor question, and I got hung up on something you said to Kirk about this. So, what is mentality? And here's where I'm going with that, to tip my hand. I'm worried that the deck here is stacked with respect to the constraint. Because one thing I heard you say to Kirk was the way you distinguish the metaphysical from the epistemological. Right? The metaphysical is the way the world is anyway, and the epistemological, our stance towards it, our take on it. And I'm worried if that's how you draw the distinction from the get-go, you've built the constraint in. Right? All the work has been done in making the separation that way. But this will depend on how you're understanding what mentality is supposed to be for these purposes.
Yeah, I guess I usually think about central cases, those being consciousness and a sort of intentionality, broadly speaking, or maybe original intentionality, as it's sometimes called, representational states like belief, and then episodes of consciousness. So I'll define it by kind of I'm not giving a set of necessary conditions, but by sort of clear cases. And so I think mentality is anything sufficiently like those two.
But okay, but if we're thinking of consciousness, awareness, intentionality, these seem to be stances towards something. Right?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, there are theories of consciousness where that's true, like Rosenthal's theory. There are such theories. Representationalism would have that view, but I certainly don't think we start there. The basic, just take a conscious experience of a pain or something like that, or headache or something. On the face of it, it doesn't seem to be stance.
That's not an awareness of something going on in your body.
Well, I think it involves that, but I mean, there is that view. It's controversial, you know. And I don't. The controversy does not align with the dispute between physicalists and their opponents. For example, recently David Papineau has argued in the Metaphysics of Sensory Experience that sensory experience is non-relational. He's an identity theorist, but it's non-relational. Representationalism is wholly false on his view. But he's a physicalist, so I don't think it's sort of baked into that notion that it's relational. On the other hand, you're absolutely right that there are certainly many mental states are relational. Anything to do with representation, and much, if not all, of mentality is representational. I guess I probably don't want to get too serious about the way I drew that distinction between metaphysics and epistemology. I probably have to say more, but to avoid this kind of issue.
I'm about to say quickly, and then I'll get off of that. I mean, even if you think that you can identify some state, some sensation, I don't know if pain is a good example, but something else, that don't look like they're what forms of awareness of something. Yeah. I take it for the kinds of objections that set up in the counterexamples, it would need to be the case that you could have, as it were, these states, these mentality, unrelated to anything that counted as that sort of thing. So you have, the claim, for example, the example here from, Zhong, with, C fiber firing being identical with pain. Identical? What's the sense of, an isolated, event could just be identical with a pain? Right? What's the sense of identity or not identity here? Sorry. In saying these things, these counterexamples also just question begging. I'm a little unclear why these are good counterexamples. And I take it part of the claim here was the counterexamples hit the functionalist version, but not the constitutionalist version. But the counterexample is just a question. I mean, sorry, I'll get off this. The first one, God tells you essentially there's a counterexample. How is that right? Yeah, what is not more question than I mean, it's true if God says that that's true, then there is a counterexample. God have to.
I mean,
that's really a different question.
I agree, and in the paper version of this, I say Dorsey's example, and I think Zhong's example, a little under-described for exactly that, because there's a reason. But Brown's, I think, are not for that reason. He gets into, he explains why they count as mental, and that they're, so in David Lewis's and Armstrong's and theory of, their familiar functionalist theory, functionalism entails type identity theory. So that was 1966. The argument is fairly simple. The idea is that, say pain in certain group like humans is whatever satisfies a certain functional description. What does in fact satisfy that description might be C fiber stimulation, so that yields, and this isn't a role identity like Putnam. There's a realizer identity theory. So on that view, in humans, pain is literally identical, numerically identical, not in any weaker sense, in the strongest possible sense. It's type identical relative to a certain population with C fiber stimulation, and so that's at least an example of. I think it's playing fair for Brown to say, a physicalist theory, respective physicalist theory, taken seriously, would be a realizer functionalist theory. And on a realizer functionalist theory, it might just turn out that there are these mental features, which are in fact physical features as well. There is physicalism-friendly mentality. And so he just needs a case, he needs a case where you have physicalism-friendly mentality, but it's also fundamental. That's so I agree. I think your point is correct about Zhong and Dorsey, because they just more or less stipulate that, hey, it's like a cookie case we read in the paper, it turns out that C fiber stimulation is fun. I mean, the idea that C fiber stimulation is fundamental is bizarre to me, because wait a minute, these are kind of complex things. I don't see how that could be fundamental in any sense, but these are weaknesses in those examples. But the nice thing about Brown's example is he's basically making use of reals or functionals and saying this really does look like it's a case like this. And Stoljar too, in talking about talking about panpsychism, says why he's actually echoing a comment Lewis made 20 years before, but why couldn't consciousness be everywhere if it could be somewhere? If you're not in a limitivist, consciousness could it's at least consistent with physicalism. Not that we have evidence that it's true, but there doesn't seem to be any flat contradiction. But that's because, in my view, he's thinking about fundamentality in this levels-based sense. So then where it is, the physicalists don't have to come down on where it is, or how is it ubiquitous or very rare, or it's just physicalists can be as minimal physicalism can be neutral on that issue. But what they can't be neutral on is that there can be anything in the world which isn't fundamentally physical in the sense of physically composed or a basic part or a basic physical thing like a quartz.
Katie?
Great. I just wanted to ask you, sort of invite you to say a little bit more about your speculations at the end. And especially, so if I was understanding you right, your suggestion was, people are assuming that the NFM is unpacked in this sort of fundamental level way because they're failing to appreciate that the right way to understand physicalism is as this sort of type monism, and once you understand it that way, the constitution view kind of falls out.
Yep.
And so I'm wondering, is there some other way of sort of understanding physicalism that would give rise to the levels view? Or do you think what's going on is something like, they're sort of just saying the phrase to themselves, physicalism is physicalism means that everything is fundamentally physical, and the levels view is just sort of some way of unpacking that, but there's not like some sort of nice unified picture of what physicalism means that gives rise to that in the way that sort of this type monism picture nicely gives rise to the constitution view. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, and I don't have a good answer to it. There might well be. To make sure I understand, so right. I was interested in saying that the constitutional version does fall out of this picture of physicalism as a version of type monism. I never want to say whether it's monism or monism, so I just asked it. But anyway, but there might be a sort of big picture view which also gives rise to the levels view, and they might well be. I just don't know what it is. One thing it has in its favor is that there's a sense in which it's clear, whereas I'm using dark notions like primitive and constitution, and my opponents could say, hey, I know what a level is. On the other hand, there are complications with levels. Think of it this way, on this particular issue. Let's take, to go back to, I guess, the point Kirk raised, take an identity theory in which, forget about mentality, say tables are identical, on some views, tables are identical with the set of molecules or fundamental physical things that compose them. Right? There isn't, that's not my view, but some views, tables literally are identical, numerically identical, with things at the most fundamental level. So, by Leibniz's law, shouldn't the tables be at the most fundamental level as well? You would have thought that maybe that no fundamental mentality constraint would be controversial, but no fundamental tables? I thought everyone would be on board with that. So I'm initially inclined to think clarity and simplicity, and fear of dark, obscure concepts like constitution might drive my opponents, but even they have complications.
Joshua, are there any questions on Zoom?
I do not think so.
No?
Nope. At least there's nothing in the chat.
Okay. Tim?
Okay, I may be picking up on what Katie was asking. So I was struck in thinking about the Brown examples. there's a different way of thinking about kind of anti-physicalism. So you're saying, well, physicalism and how we think about the mental, they go hand in hand. And you're saying, well, we think about physicalism in relation to its main opponents, dualism and idealism. That's kind of modern philosophy onward kind of dialectic. I'm thinking if we go further back, I'm thinking okay, Aristotle, right? A kind of holism about organized wholes. Brown's giving us scenarios where mentality makes a fundamental difference, right? That is, the form of the whole, in some sense, determines how the primitive elements, whatever they are, behave.
When the priority model.
When they're caught up within the whole. Well, priority monism is one, version of this cosmic. But I'm just saying, right? So you could have a view of living things that have mental properties, right? There's a sense in which that rankles against the physicalist sensibility just as well as any view about so it might be the form is not a kind of primitive feature in the sense of an efficient causal feature. It dictates the way the parts behave differently when they're organized within the whole. So it's almost like the way we think about physicalism it's a conjunction of no primitive mentality constitutionally, but also maybe this kind of behaviorally. Everything is fixed by the behavior of the elements that obey laws that are the same whether the parts are bound up in living systems or not. So I don't know what you think about this. It's certainly against the sensibilities if this turned out to be true, some kind of relational holism. It's not unique to mentality, though. Right? I mean, Aristotle would say living things in general.
Yes, I have a couple of things to say about that. Really interesting question. I take it the debate that I mean to be engaged in here is about sort of what the minimal physicalist thesis is, and I think it is quite open for physicalists, even contemporary ones, to be holists. I mean, priority monist is a version of that. Whether say life, I mean, this is a debate in the 19th century, about whether life is basically, and I think they're right, at least historically, and there may be non-historical reasons as well, I think there probably are. Historically, physicalists are on the anti side of is the question, is life basic, something like that, or living is the concept of living being basic, or something like that. That's certainly true, but I don't think it's built into the minimalist physicalist thesis that holism per se, that you have to be an atomist, in a metaphysical sense, to be a physicalist. And a question that I'm sure has occurred to all of you, and certainly occurs to me, is why don't I just start fussing about words? We can use this term. Physicalist the term could be used for anything we want. It's a term of art. So, in a sense, I want to say, and there are different things we can mean by physicalism, and in connection to that debate in the 19th century, it meant something quite different. And there, we might say physicalism has, even the minimalist thesis has stronger commitments than what I'm saying here, because if you think of the sort of life is a fundamental concept, life isn't a fundamental concept debate. You think of physicals as taking the anti-side, then the commitments are stronger. But more generally, with regard to the question of what kind of question, the broad question is how do we define physicalism? And oh my gosh, are we going back to that old bad kind of philosophy where we just kind of define stuff? I think my answer to that is, well, in a sense, I concede that this is real. All I really am doing is considering a linguistic question, but I don't think all linguistic questions are trivial linguistic questions. The question about the commitment to the theory is what's being debated. The way I usually get into this kind of issue is because I've written so much on the anti-physicalist arguments. I asked myself, well, what exactly is the theory that they are attacking? What are the basic commitments of the theory that they're attacking? Does that align with what people actually say who advocate the theory? It's a linguistic question, and I'm fine with subscripting physicals and physicalism 1 and 2 and so forth. But I think there is an interesting, it's largely a historical question. When Jessica Wilson says this is a fundamental commitment to physicalism, notice what she says. Physicalism came out of materialism, and she's talking about the history. One thing and I think that's exactly the right way to think of it. What historically has been this sort of core, if there is a core?
Sharon, you have follow-up?
Yeah, follow up on this one. So if we try to, sorry for the sitting to the audience, rotate around the axis of our real need here, and not just ask the linguistic question, but like to be like, what hangs on it?
Yeah.
I'm just kind of inviting you to like sort of zoom out, like from your perspective, like not necessarily what would be immediately following directly from physicalism as you understand it, or immediately entail it, but like what are some, what do you think hangs on it, and like, what are the interesting distinctions for you? Is it something like physicalism should be something that like gets significant support in the sciences? It should be something that implies there's a consciousness after death, at the biggest level of pretend you're trying to introduce undergrads to make undergrads care, tell them why your research is so awesome and stuff like.
I would first of all in that context I would definitely use weasel words. I would. Good question.
We understand you need to not inflict your ideological opinions on people. So
I would say
This
like.
is not going to get tutored.
I think this is true, that there is a connection between some of those. I mean, actually, let me answer by giving an anecdote. Because just this kind of question I was addressing it at the Pacific APA. There's a session on my recent book on the knowledge argument, and one of my commentators was Charles Seward, and he said, so basically, what you're saying about these issues that you're engaging in, they really have nothing to do with the debate between you and your opponents. There's nothing to do with stuff like, can we live after death, life after death, and is there supernatural, or are there, angels or ghosts and stuff like that, right? You're really not engaging in that. It's not like when you're criticizing physicalism, you're not saying any of that stuff follows, right? You're talking about, basically, microphysical necessitarian grounding. And I was like, that doesn't sound like it's connected to any of that stuff that seems to be interesting. But I never thought this thing is connected. We start with this big issue. What fundamentally does, it's the same question I think that Thales asked. What fundamentally does the world contain? Is there a lot of different things, or just one thing, or maybe just two things? And sort of a basic metaphysical question about the fundamental nature of the world we live in. And this debate comes out of that, like some important answers historically. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt. I just mean, the question isn't, why care? I just mean, is the reason why you care, does it relate to, I was just trying to list the most crude stereotypical things that come to mind when I think about physicalism, being supported by the sciences, or
No, I actually think there certainly are real issues there, but I think the debate that interests me mostly is sort of things like whether a basic supervenience claim that pretty much is true or false. I think that's an interesting question, and it'll tell us something about the fundamental nature of the world. It's not going to tell us whether there are ghosts or the naturalism is true or anything like that. But I guess I start from a broadly.
So how does having analyzing the concept of physicalism help? I take it your physicalists are able to.
Oh no, I never said I was a physicalist. Sorry.
No, not you're a physicalist. I take it that so here you have your research program characterizing physicalism, right?
Yeah.
And we're not just conceptually analyzing random things. I mean, maybe we are. Maybe you could get some following online for conceptually analyzing flash mobs or being an influencer or something. But I take it that you think this is going to be help us do some cool metaphysics.
Yeah.
So something might hang on this distinction. This might be a useful distinction to draw to something. And I get caring about supervenience. I definitely care about finding an elegant supervenient space for reality. But what about this distinction that you're analyzing, the one between physicalism or not, which is different from supervenience?
Yeah. Well, it's different from, but very closely connected to it. So I'm ultimately interested in these basic metaphysical questions about the nature of the world, and I think physicalism has and I think it's something that the 2020 philosophers poll, Bill Paper's poll says something like 52%, which, you know, it's dropped, but it's still pretty massive agreement among philosophers about its likely truth. So this is at least as a candidate for the truth. So I want to understand it and understand the arguments for it and against it. And I guess I can also give a little autobiography thing where I was giving a talk defending the claim that that physicalism entails a kind of fairly strong supervenience claim, which has been questioned as really cool arguments by Barbara Montero and some others, Levine also, but Barbara Montero's given the main ones, and I was trying to answer those arguments, and I partly appealed to the idea that philosophy 101 kind of thing. Well, physicalism is kind of monism and dual is opposed to dualism, and Amy Kind in the audience asked, well, why should we assume that historically assume? And Barbara Montero also has that view. It's like, why should we? What this stuff's about monism? What's important there? And that has led me to these kinds of these issues where I guess I'm. And what I envy Barbara for her changing the she's thinking about things in a new way, which I really envy. But I'm sort of a bit old-fashioned, and I sort of think, well, I understand physicalism to be just a specific version of this. It's like a variant of all is water. All is physical, and from that I think springs the nothing over and above idea, and from that I think springs the supervenience claim, and so these are an interesting, I went to a hippie college. I like to be non-conform, but I kind of think the tradition is right here on reflection. So and I think it's an important perspective, at least, and coherent. So that's, I don't know if that directly. Yes.
Sherry. Great. So. I have no dog in this fight, just want to tell you that. So, whatever, if it sounds like I'm being, whatever, critical, I'm not trying to argue for any position, I'm trying to understand.
Yeah.
So, what I thought, like you, that the one that's most interesting is the quantum AI case, and for the reasons you gave, I think you're right. And it got me thinking, I've never really had any understanding of what panpsychism could be like. But this one got me thinking maybe I do. So here's what I'm thinking. I was understanding this, unlike the way you understand it in terms of the dots and so on, as follows: that in quantum computing, and forgive me, I don't know all the details about how that works, but in quantum computing, I gather the idea is you exploit what we would all call fundamental quantum laws and behavior of fundamental particles to do computation.
Yep.
Now, one way of thinking about that, the way you use to critique this view, is that it's only in sort of functional clusters that these fundamental properties do any computing. But the dots, so that's the dot part.
Yeah.
So you get a circle, the circle is the computing, the mental phenomena. But the dots themselves, those are not in any way computing, right?
Right.
I understood him differently. I understood him to be saying something. So this reminded me of the old something long ago. Dennett, remember, he talks about functional analysis of the mind. It gets down to stupid AND gates.
Yeah.
Right. But of course, the stupid AND gates are functioning clusters of neurons. So that's not fundamental. But if you're at the quantum level, the stupid AND gates are fundamental. And the dots are the stupid AND gates.
No.
So I'm thinking you're missing that in your reply, that on this view, you break down the complex functional structure into basic, like stupid AND gates. But the stupid AND gates are part of the fundamental fabric of the universe. And so they are identical with these fundamental things.
that's the best I can do to defend him against your objection. So it's not just levels, because it bottoms out at a structure that is in its behavior on its own, separated from its role in the whole thing, mental, in a way.
Wait, say that last thing again?
Well, it's computational in some way. So if that's enough to be mental, which, I don't know. That's the way I understood him, and I thought that your dismissal of it using the diagram is not charitable enough.
It's a disanalogy.
Yeah, so it doesn't, I don't think that argument that you give works against the view I just offered. Now, whether that really counts as mental, I'm not going to argue that, because who knows? The mental is just as squishy as physical, I think.
Yeah, I mean, well, at least in the mental case, we have sort of very clear examples, whereas physical does seem more speculative, but fair enough. I mean, I'm not entirely sure I'm getting the force of this, because the reason I used the dot example was just to show that just because X is constituted by Y and Y has a certain feature, it doesn't follow that that feature plays any role in Y's helping to constitute X. That's all I mean by this. And I think that, so, these could have been squares, and likewise the stupid AND gates, so they might be mental, but they might not. As far as the mentality of the higher thing goes, it doesn't matter whether the AND gates are stupid or smart, so to speak. That's the only point I was making. Remember, this came at.
But I guess what I'm suggesting is the proposal from Brown is that you can't regard the dots as non-mental just because they constitute the circle, but the suggestion that you're saying is, well, therefore they're at the basic level, they're not mental at all. And I'm saying he could argue no, and look at how these fundamental quantum states behave. They are, this is the panpsychism, they are already in a way computational, and at the fundamental level.
But I didn't say that they weren't mental. In fact, I grant that they are mental. But the question is whether their mentality does the constituting work of creating the mentality of the higher thing. That's the question. I mean, they could be. In what sense are they mental? Well, if they're mental. Well, they're mental because because of realized functionalism, they play a certain functional role in the cognitive system of the brain. Right? That's of the quantum AI. That's why they're mental. It's like why a neuron, why C fibers are mental according to Lewis. C fibers are mental according to Lewis because they satisfy a functional description. They play a certain role in a certain population. Likewise, in the population of one of the quantum. I don't know what the population is in the case of the quantum AI. But relative to that population, the stuff going on at the quantum level, all this hidden information and so forth is playing a certain functional role. That's why it's counting as mental. But that's why it counts as mental. But it's being mental doesn't really matter. Anything, whether it's mental or not, playing that role would create the mentality of the quantum AI. So I don't have to deny that these very small things are mental. I just have to deny that their mentality is contributing to the bigger mentality of the quantum. That's where I drove to go through the analogy.
Okay, well, I'll think more about it. Thank you.
There are several follow-ups on this. Kirk has a follow-up, and then Sharon.
Okay, so So Brown is in the realizer of functionalism camp, right? So he's saying that, some kind of quantum AI system, really low-level stuff, and that low-level stuff is playing a certain functional role in a system.
Yeah.
And in virtue of playing that functional role, we get to identify some mental state with that particular physical state.
Yeah.
That's the role filler.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so the lower level things get to be called mental.
Yeah.
In virtue they're playing a role in the system.
That's exactly right.
So that's what you're thinking.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that the role that is realizer functionalism is important rather than just straight up analytic function.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, well, I guess I was thinking of an amendment of his view, and the one that seems like he should take, and whether it makes sense. I mean, I think that the problem here is not just physical, but also mental, what counts as mental, but it's not clear that you've ruled out a certain option.
I'm not quite seeing it, I didn't quite see what
So, yeah, the part that I thought, the reason I said, okay, I'll think about it is, I think what you were saying is, even if at the fundamental level there are these basic, kind of stupid but still conscious hand gates, you're thinking about multiple realizability. There could be in another world something that also realized just that very thing, so it wouldn't be fundamental. And that's what I just want to think more about. Maybe, but that argument goes beyond what you say in the paper. And it's a further step that I think you would need to take and make good on.
There may be a move there that I need to think more about.
Sharon?
So maybe this is a bit in the area that Gary's already going, but so imagine a variant on functionalism that's necessarily donkey functionalism. So
Necessarily donkey?
Yeah,
Okay.
donkey, you keep slicing it and you all the way down. Right, so your regular functionalism, your AND gates can be these quantum things that wind up being physically fundamental and allow of a mentally description, all the way down. Or they can be dumb machines that stop allowing of a mental description all the way down.
Right.
Suppose that someone, though, they're more restrictive functionalists. They say it has to be, mental properties. They have to play this functional role, and they have to do that. They have to be realized by something which admits of a mental description of a whatever similarly functional description all the way down. Trying to do this without bad recursion or paradox. So I just thought it might be. I wanted to invite you to say more about how your constitution-based theory of physicalism applies to that case. This is not a challenge, but just kind of a
I guess you just repeat the case again.
So the case is, here's the theory that someone has, and would you classify this dude, the following dude, as a physicalist? He's like, well, what I believe is very much like functionalism, except not all realizers are okay. You have to have realizers of those high-level functions that themselves, continually admit of physical description all the way down until you get to what's fundamental. So the quantum realization is okay. You can have consciousness in such a being, but if our neurons and stuff wind up not admitting of a consciousness-y description of a mental description, then we don't count as having pain and all that. It's a silly view, but maybe, but so I wanted.
So let's say if I understand. Sorry to interrupt. So the neurons on this view are not they're not counted as mental because they have no mental component in describing their nature.
I mean, or if they didn't, I was just being playful with that, but the stupid AND gates or whatever maybe are not, our hypothesis don't allow a mental description. And what was special about the quantum mechanics version is it seems like for every layer that you go down, like you have something that still allows of like a mentalist description where you're like, oh, it's computing something, it's blah, blah, blah. So would you feel like, do you think someone that thought that would be physicalist or not, just out of curiosity?
Well, I mean, I think it comes down to whether, I like Brown's term physicalism friendly. You know, and I take it that idea is something like, well, if something could be mental, if you're not an eliminativist, you think that mentality exists and you're a physicalist. You think mentality exists. Well, what kind of mentality is okay? You know, ghosts aren't, right? So what's okay? What's okay is if it's something is physical, something is mental in virtue of some realizing some relational structure, something like that. Basically, in terms of structural features, roughly. And so something counts as mental then because it realizes these certain, just like it'll count like a table if it realizes a certain description. So it'll count as mental in the same way. But it's physicalism friendly because there's nothing there but the structure and things realizing it. So I started with that idea, and the question in your case, you know, is there anything more than that? And it didn't sound like there had to be, although at one point you described the stupid AND gates in a way that maybe there was, you know, this element of consciousness which doesn't consist in just, you know, the realization of a kind of structural description. If there is, then no good as far as physicalism. If there isn't, then it's physically kosher. Physicalism kosher.
So the question is supposed to be: suppose that the requirements for having a mental property like thing are conjunction of two things.
Yeah.
You have the functional description.
Yeah.
And then you have that whatever it is, a constraint on what realizes it, which is that everything that realizes it, like if you chain all the way down, like must at every level admit of a similarly mental description.
Oh, a mental description. Ah.
So it's like you described, we were talking in this talk, you were evoking these very interesting worlds that involve many layers of mental description all the way down and many layers of physical description all the way down. Like, whoa, that's like a trippy, cool possibility. What would you say about someone who says that's what consciousness has to be like?
Oh, well, like, consciousness has to be like?
Yes.
Oh, gosh.
That's necessarily done. Like,
yeah, that is a weird view. I don't know what would motivate, but independently of its its weirdness, is it a version of physicalism?
Yeah,
I think it can be, because it sounds like it's consistent with the MPW world that Brown's other example. It sounds like MPW world is that, because it's called an MPW all mental, all physical. Everything there is mental. But Brown's point was not that this world dualism couldn't be true of this world, is that it needn't be true of this world. Physicalism could be true because although everything is mental, everything, no exception, at every level, no matter how far it goes on down infinitely, even so, the only mentality that occurs there is physicalism friendly. Likewise, for your case, it just sounds like you're adding this thing that, well, it's not just that this is a sort of conceivable world. This is, if the world has consciousness, then the world has to be that description, which strikes me as, again, not
plausible.
Not plausible.
But so the issue is when you say physicalism is to be understood in terms of constitution and not required. So this world where everything can be, constitutively explained in terms of something physical and something mental. Whenever you have something mental, your thought is that still is, you would classify that as a physicalism friendly world because
it's compatible with physicalism. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but it's compatible with it. It depends on, for me.
Yeah. So how does it? What's the difference? All right, sorry, I will leave this to actually. I'll ask it. Another time. I don't want to dominate that.
Sorry.
So we've got some more follow-ups on this. I think Tim and then Gary.
I'm going to try to take another spin on what I think Gary was driving at. So, primitive mentality, right? You could think of the mental side in terms of consciousness or intentionality, right? A traditional divide.
Yeah.
And on the consciousness side, we get this views kind of, well, what about proto-phenomenality?
Yep.
Is that a kind of physicalism? It's blurring a little bit, the line. Okay, so now over here, Gary's reading of what was going on in the Brown example, again, the bits, it's crucial, they're intrinsic features. They're not just nodes in a relational structure. The idea is they have intrinsic informational content that's fundamental. And so we get you get physicists talking in a kind of woolly way. Information is fundamental to reality, and then that's like you might say a proto-intentionality. And now this is also blurring
That's exactly what I had.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was being a little thick there. Yeah. Then for me, it's going to come down to, what are those intrinsic features? Are those physicals friendly or not?
But if they can only be understood in terms of informational content, there's no other way of reducing them.
I don't know exactly by informational content, but that sounds suspiciously, mentalistic.
Well, that language you use, but just from the quotation from Brown, there's these hidden informational content. You said at some point they get exploited in these processes. You can't measure it directly, but somehow
it's there.
You can tell they're there.
We could get some kind of, but that sounds to me like it's looking like primitive mentality or mentally constituted mentality in there. So it looks like it's not going to be physical. It's not going to be counterexample, not because there's a mentality there, but because physicalism couldn't be true of it.
Well, but why wouldn't we just say our best, most fundamental physical theory actually contains this kind of stuff in it?
That's fine. In fact,
it's identical with that stuff.
I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing that comes up in connection to the second one of Handel's dilemma. Suppose we just find, when Zhong says, hey, we might find out that S neutrino fluctuation is identical to consciousness, I take it that's a empirical possibility. We might actually find that, but I also take it that would be a case where you say, it turns out physicalism isn't true. If consciousness is a fundamental feature of the world, that in that sense, then physicalism turns out isn't true. That doesn't mean that supernaturalism is true, or naturalism is false, or that there's life after death or anything like that. But it doesn't mean it's not. But it doesn't mean nothing like that follows. But it doesn't sound like it's in keeping with the historical idea of physicalism that there's just one kind of thing, and that's physical. Now, there are these views which more liberal view. Dowell, I think, might be flirts with this, and certainly Barbara Montero, that hey, physicalism, it's in this situation, physicalism would be true because as long as we're atheists, that's what Barbara says at some point. As long as you don't think God exists, then you're a physicalist. I remember she pointed around the table. You believe God exists? No. Physicalist. You believe, and it's like, okay, so we can use the term in that way. But I think there's at least, put it this way, there's an important historical tradition according to which in that scenario, physicalism is just false. If consciousness turns out to, there's a paper by Dave Chalmers and McQueen which says, hey, there's evidence that consciousness is a fundamental thing which collapses the wave function. If they're right, it's kind of hard to reconcile with this tradition.
Well, that depends on how they think that.
That's true.
If they think that it's just clear once we understand quantum physics that comes out and we have to accept it, it's different from positing an additional thing, some conscious states, which might not have existed in another world or something. Those are two different ways of thinking about it.
I take that point, but the point is that if consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe, irreducible to anything else in any sense, then it seems, and if physical phenomena are something different from that, then it looks like we've got two basic things there. And if consciousness is the only thing that exists, that looks more like idealism than physicalism to me. Again, you could reject these categories. That's another way to go about it. Say, this is all fuddy-duddy way of cutting up the world. But I think it's a useful distinction. I think there are important debates that depend on it. So I'm okay with being old-fashioned.
So there are two people in the queue. Kirk, was that a follow-up or was that a?
It wasn't kind of follow-up. It's just on the, is whatever the complete physics tells us about the world indicate physicalism, if it turns out to have mental properties as somewhere fundamental. If physics is concerned with the dynamics of the world, then a complete theory has to encompass everything that contributes to it. And you say whatever theory comes out to be true is physicalist per se, and Descartes is a physicalist.
Yeah.
Because mental substances are required to understand the dynamics of the world.
That's right. I think that's the reductio. That's exactly what.
Thank you for your talk. I have a sense, and my question may not be very smart, but I want to ask you about this notion of, I'm just trying to better clarify what the commitment of like physicalism are, and I don't know very well if it's a reasonable question, but so you mentioned this analogy with the circle and the different parts that arrange the circle, and you say like the dots that make the circle, they are circular, but what does the work, the constituting work, is the circularity of arrangement. So what is fundamentally circular is the arrangement of things. So, and the point I think is that arrangements of things cannot be part of the fundamental reality. It's not arrangement of stuff, like they're like relational, so they cannot be like fundamental things in the physics. That's partially why. So I imagine that if it's like possible to have like among the list of what is fundamental whatsoever in our physical theories, there are arrangement of stuff. And for example, there can be arrangement of things that are fundamental, and that's what is constituting, like for example, mentality. I wonder if that's something that is not compatible with physicalism or not. Is it?
No, it's not incompatible. In fact, in some views, arrangement, so to speak, is all there is. I mean, the Levine and Ross view on which there's a famous book known as it's called "Everything Must Go," meaning there aren't any things that are arranged. The only thing we have that are arranged, that are in the structures, are further structures, and it goes on forever. There's nothing. There's no ultimate relata, which aren't themselves structural, and that fits very well with the contemporary physicalist outlook. So arrangements, arrangements is Brown's word, a clear example of a kind of structure, spatial arrangement, but no, those are very much, the idea of arrangements can be basic, and it's very much in keeping with the physicalist program.
So if that's compatible,
yeah.
So if there are arrangements that are functionally identical with mentality, why is it not mentality then at the fundamental level, for example, in this case, in a case like this?
Oh, it might be on the fundamental level. That's right, but it wouldn't. I guess one thing that your question reminds me, I haven't actually said. A view of mine is kind of operating in the background of some of these remarks, is that, as far as I can tell, physicalism, even an identity form of physicalism, which identifies consciousness with an arrangement or something like that, has got to give a kind of priority to the physical side of the identity when you make an identity claim. So sometimes people say, hey, you can summarize physicalism as a view that say, mental states are identical to brain states, and that's it. You either believe that or not. But that can't be right, because you could be a Berkeleian idealist and say that mental states are physical states. Isn't that interesting that we've discovered what physical states really are? They're really mental states, right? And so there's got to be an asymmetry there. So to bring it back to your question. If we find out that consciousness just is identical to some, S neutrino fluctuation or something like that, well, that could end up being a view which is consistent with physicalism if you give the S neutrino fluctuation side of the identity the kind of proper priority. You say that's, everything, consciousness supervenes on that. It's identical to that, but that's to say it's nothing more than that. If you go the other way and say, well, or if you say that consciousness is the more basic description, so it's not sounding like a physicalist view. I'm not quite sure.
Sharon, was that a follow-up?
No, but.
Not a follow-up?
Separate question.
Separate question, okay. Matthew?
Oh, thank you for your talk. Actually, David stole the original question. Like, really, what is the point of coming late in the Q&A? That was hilarious. I thought, yeah, we just stipulate God's as there is a company.
Yeah.
It's like a parody of analytic
Yeah.
Let me ask something different. So, one thing I struggle with this in this topic a little bit, and maybe in the parallel kind of Browning literature, is I'm not always sure what exactly is meant by different levels. I mean, this sounds like a sort of spatial metaphor to me.
Yeah.
I mean, is it supposed to be reducible to something more precise, like a supervenience relation or an emergence relation? Otherwise, I find it very hard to kind of know what we're really I mean, I can visualize this idea of there are different levels, but I don't really follow it, I guess.
Yeah, I'm kind of
to evaluate what's going on.
I'm afraid I have to disappoint. I'm kind of with you here. The levels talk, especially when I gave the example before of, if your identity theories are tables at the fundamental level. It's very, very hard to flesh out. I mean, in some sense, look, it's just a fact that big things are made of smaller things. At least in the physical world, big things, this pen is made of littler things. That's true, and you can just say, well, the lower level is the level at which maybe we study the little things, the littler things like chemicals, would be the chemical level, and the things that compose the chemicals, the atoms and so forth are molecules and atoms and then subatomic particles, particle physics, that's at a lower level. There's some sense in which this is uncontroversial, that there are levels in that sense, but that's not to be take it terribly seriously. When people talk about levels in this literature, they usually mean, I take it, here the term metaphysical is meant to mean something, I take it. I'm not even sure what it means. There's a kind of critique of this way of looking at things by Kevin Morris and John Howell, and I'm somewhat sympathetic to that. I don't want to take this, in some sense, there's I think there's some sense in which physics is a more fundamental science than any other science, but I don't know how seriously to take the levels talk. So I'm granting here for the sake of argument that nature is stratified into these levels. And somewhat more where there's a kind of metaphysical dependence relation. It's not merely a causal dependence, synchronous kind of and I take it that will be partly fleshed out in terms of supervenience claims. Probably not wholly in terms of supervenience, something stronger like grounding or constitution. So there'll be a basic level of reality that grounds everything else, and you have on top of that less basic like chemistry and biology, mycology or something that there will be a metaphysical dependence, and there may be a way to flesh this out in a useful way, at least in terms of supervenience. But it does get complicated because of views like that say look like they're interlevel views, which say that a big thing is literally identical to the sort of things that compose it. Well, if you have that kind of view, it's very hard to it's hard to have that neat stacked like the metaphor doesn't go very far.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's your fault. It's just I find it hard to get into the debate. But there seems to be this slippage between sometimes talking about something that looks more like mereology, talking something that looks more like levels of description, generality, and then other things that seem to talk about some type of supervenience or emergence relation. I just got a little lost in that, I guess.
Yeah, that's fair enough, and I think Morris does a pretty good job in drawing those distinctions.
Okay.
Pretty good job. The one I'm most sympathetic to is the idea of sort of stacks of composition or supervenience. But again, that doesn't play well with certain views in sort of first order metaphysics.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
We have 4 minutes left. Sharon, you have a question? I would like to ask a question. So
Okay, I'm trying to be quite tight because I realized this is a punchier version, so I've had a bit of insomnia. So you're like, look, the quantum mechanics, quantum mechanical computer world, is put forward as an example of like physicalism that allows room for the mental, the purely fundamental, but it's only levels fundamental, it's not constitutive fundamental, because hey, the mental things are like forming a relevant pattern, and the things that are underlying it, like that are physically fundamental, are also mental, but they just so happen to be. It's not constitutively relevant to that. They could just as well be non-mental things. They could just as well be dumb hand gates, right?
Yep.
Okay. And so then the question was, what about the view which says they couldn't just as well be dumb hand gates? They have to be a mental description, right? So the version of the circle which had little squares inside, this kind of theory of mind would say that doesn't count as containing consciousness. So the circle, is a circle, or the mental is the mental in virtue of like both, like being like circle shaped up here and like made of little circle shaped things below. Why isn't that a way of like fixing up the counterexample and being like, oh, here's something that's both physicalism friendly and like, mental, allows room for the mental in like your like souped up tokens and souped up sense.
Yeah, but my answer, I don't know if it's satisfying now, but my answer is that it's not as clearly physicalism friendly. It's not so clear that physicalism could be true of that world.
Or it's not, it was even compatible with the world. I thought you had said that it was compatible with physicalism, then I was like,
no,
look at the staircase, I was like, aha.
No, this gets into these same issues of panpsychism and whether, proto-panpsychism and so forth. So it took me a little thick to understand Gary's initial point, but I think I see it now, and I think my best answer, whether or not it works, is to say that if we build that into the case, it's not as clearly physicalism friendly. I mean, Brown's original version of the case seemed fine, seemed physicalism friendly enough, but in this case, when we add these details, it's not so clear. That's the best I can do, at least on the fly.
So I was hoping to ask you a question about sort of what's going on with this project in sort of a big picture way. Because my first thought was, this seems like it's a terminological question. It's up to physicalists to tell us what thesis they're arguing for. In any given case, if somebody wants to call themselves an anti-physicalist, they need to tell us what they're arguing against. Then in response to Tim, it sounded like you were saying, I want to figure out what have the most important, most prominent physicalists been after. And one way to get at that is to sort of, as I would approach it, would be sort of as an interpretive and reconstructive project. We look at what they said, we look at what people who tried to argue against them said, and we try to figure out, okay, what are these people after? What's this argument all about? And that's really, as I said, more of an interpretive and reconstructive project. It didn't seem to me, so that's how you describe things maybe in response to Tim, but when you characterize the NFM constraint, you describe this as something that would be an a priori restriction. And that made it sound as though we're doing something there's supposed to be some kind of truth, right? Something about physicalism and the NFM constraint, there's some kind of truth here, and it's something we're going to somehow know a priori. And so I wanted to know what kind of project are you engaged in, and so how to think about the background, the epistemology of it.
Sorry, the terminology I think misled, and I think my bad. No, you understood it right. This is the